my first question would go to Terry. Terry, as the CEO and founder of the Digital Data Bank, we are talking about this concept of digital identity. How is your solution making it easier for people to interact online, to share their information in a digital way? And then, secondly, how do you see your system interacting with this digital identity, self-sovereign identity community going forward?
Yeah, thanks, Lohan. Um, to answer the first question, the digital data bank, the concept that we're using in the digital data bank is that it's based on the fact that in South Africa there is only one source currently of identity, and that's with Home Affairs. But it has no form of digital identity. So it's all, as you say, paper based. And when you're born, you get given a death certificate, some information gets registered around you. And it's not until you get an ID book that you actually got any form of actual identity. And once you've got that, you then have to use that document, that manual document or that physical document to prove your identity. What we've done at the Digital Data Bank is that we've taken our platform and we've integrated it into or with an API into Home Affairs, where we can first of all match the name, surname, and ID number, and obviously your gender and date of birth with Home Affairs. And then once we've done that, we then do an authentication, a biometric authentication, and that either be via fingerprint or it can be via facial recognition. And once we've created that, we create a digital identity for the individual. And that enables the individual from that point onwards to always be able to work from within their platform or their ecosystem or the exchange, as we call it. They're able to interact with anybody over the internet, and the person they're interacting with or transacting with knows that that person has been verified and authenticated. So what we've done is we've put the authentication back in the hands of the individual rather than excuse me, rather than the bank or the insurance company or whoever else they might be interacting with, rather than them having to authenticate that person every time. So it's a very simple solution to a very complex problem. And as was being discussed before we came online, was when do you need to have full identity and when don't you? And there's different levels. And Deline was saying that when you go into a bar or a nightclub or anything, they only have to know whether you're over 18. They don't need to know any of your other details. And with the Digital Data Bank platform, we're able to do that. And the only reason that we went down that road was simply because we felt that people had to take control of their own information. They had to be able to disseminate that information and track who they've shared that information with. But the person receiving it needed to know that it came from the person they think it came from. And fundamentally, that's how we've solved the problem for a number of institutions, not banks, but a number of other institutions. And, it goes for schools, universities, doctors, hospitals, medical aid, employers, all those kind of areas of where identification is required.
Great. So it's very interesting because you mentioned a few things that resonates quite well with me, like being able to give the user back control, how they control their data, when they consent for this data to be authorized, and how they can share information in an online world. And that is very aligned with the concept of digital, or more specifically in my world, self-sovereign identity. So how do you foresee your system in the future, kind of integrating with this whole new paradigm of identity called self-sovereign identity?
Lohan, we don't really look at our function as a company to deliver identity. We're doing it simply because there is no other mechanism for it to be done at the moment. But what we have done is that we've built an audit trail, a ledger, an event manager, whatever you want to call it, into a person's vault. So when you open up a vault, every transaction, every event, every log that you take is entered into your ledger. And at any time in the future, you can take your capsule of data and you could nest it onto a blockchain with that ledger and have the history behind it. Because it is going to get to the point where SSI will be a far better mechanism for identification. And the reason I say that is that, there are a billion people in the world, which is 15% of the population, who have no form of identity at all. And there's 2 billion more who have an identity but can't use it because they have no mechanism to use it. So they don't have an ID book or any kind of document. They just know that they've been registered at birth. So self-sovereign identity, I think, is going to help in that area immensely. And what we will do is we will then use that as our mechanism for identification in the future. But I don't think we're there yet, and I think we've still got a way to go before we get there. And our solution is, you can call it an intermediary solution, but it is something that is available now.
Great, thank you very much. So we've heard about like what Terry mentioned and termed like intermediary solutions. And I would like to move over into more of the, how can I say, moving towards this concept of self-sovereign identity via the panelists. And Leon, you have been pivotal in building a platform called Secure Citizen. And Secure Citizen is a digitally enabled onboarding and verification platform. Can you, first of all, just take us and provide the audience with a view of what is this thing called digital identity or self-sovereign identity? Because I think a lot of the audience might understand the concept, but can you give us a bit more detail of what are we really referring to here?
So I think the easiest way, and we've presented digital identity.
You muted.
No, you're not. I can hear you.
Can you hear me now?
I can hear you.
Okay, so we've presented the Secure Citizen solution to quite a number of companies, and as a company that is part owned by Southern African Fraud Prevention Services, our aim is very similar to the Digital Data Bank, where we want to create the capability for people to own their identity. And the easiest way to explain this is, if you think about how people have historically verified their identity, the traditional methods are fundamentally flawed. If you think about when you need to open a bank account or you need to prove who you are, you take a copy of your ID document that was given to you by the Department of Home Affairs, and you go to a commissioner of oaths like a policeman or another commissioner of oaths in a bank, and they'll look at you and they'll look at the ID document and then they'll stamp the physical piece of paper and say, cool, you are who you claim to be. But at no point did they link to the Department of Home Affairs to verify that. So we are actually introducing risk in that element. Similarly, if you look at the number of data breaches that have happened globally, when you need to authentication, but if you think about the number of data breaches that have happened, that solution has also lost its efficacy. And there is ultimately a breakdown in trust. So similarly, we've created this capability where we are able to either via a corporate or directly enroll an individual into a digital identity ecosystem, where the individual then has the capability of being verified, and everybody in that ecosystem can then trust, based on the biometric verification, that the individual is who they claim to be, and it's verified against a golden source, namely the Department of Home Affairs. We additionally add a voice capability because we believe that it's important to create digital inclusivity. So if I have a feature phone, it doesn't mean that I'm any less of a possible victim. We just do what we call ground truthing, where we capture you and we verify you, and then we add a voice to it. Future, if you think about when you engage with a lot of the companies that say my voice is my password, that is biometric verification of a digital identity. What is important to distinguish though is a digital onboarding company takes an individual like Lohan and onboards them into a company's system or database for a specific purpose, creating an account or creating a membership or getting a service like a cell phone contract. However, what we've done is a digital identity creates a one-to-many, where you have verifiers in the digital ecosystem that can validate that once I've come into this ecosystem, then I'm able to transact across a multitude of companies while remaining in control of my data, and also making the companies PAPIA and anti-money laundering compliant, and creating that element of reducing risk for them. But the consumer also feels more secure when they're engaging with a company, because now if I phone you, you don't have to ask me questions anymore. You can send me a link and I'll take a selfie and I'll verify. You can verify through that biometric verification that you are who you claim to be, and then we can just conclude the business that we're why I called you. And the companies can focus on what it is that they want to deliver from a service perspective, while a digital identity company acts as the custodian of preventing fraud for them.
This is very inspiring and clearly already a step in the right direction when we talk about the concept of digital identity. But a question I would like to ask you is, what does the consumer need to understand when they kind of go into this world of digital identity? Because I think that everybody is very well versed and used to the concept of I take out my digital identity card or my passport and I show it to access some services. Mm-hmm. But suddenly we are referring to a complete new paradigm here. You're not going to take out a card or a document. You need to click a button. And what do consumers really need to understand, and how would that change their behavior utilizing these digital identity technologies?
Well, I think one of the things that is most important for a consumer to know is that just because you're not digitally active doesn't mean that you're any less of a potential victim. The fraudster really doesn't care whether you're older, whether you're digitally active or not. If you're older than 18, you are a potential victim. Similarly, I mean, the Department of Home Affairs is currently working on a national identity system, the NIS, and they're modernizing the way that we use identity. But that is because fraudsters use innovation and technology, and they're relentless. They run a business much like we do, right? They have strategies, they have technology, they have a target market, except they don't make customers, they make victims. But it's really important for consumers to know that what we're doing is we're leaning into technology rather than shying away from it. We are actually using innovation to combat fraud. And although it's not a silver bullet, what we are doing is we are increasing the risk mitigation when it comes to engaging, whether remotely or in a live environment. Just because I'm standing in front of you and I'm showing an identity document doesn't mean that I really am who I claim to be. What we're doing is creating the digital highway that allows the ability to validate that the person standing in front of you has the right to use that identity. I noticed that one of the questions that came up in the Q&A was about that discussion that we were having prior to this, us going live, about, you know, how would a company use my information, like a bar or a club, or even if you're signing a contract, the company needs to make sure that you are over 18 and have the right to sign an agreement. Quite simply, we are creating the capability for people to be able to select what is it that is important for me to conclude this transaction, and how do I display that with you without creating risk for myself. So you don't need to know what my age is. You don't need to know where I live, but you do need to know what my name and surname is, that I'm potentially vaccinated if I'm going to enter your property, or that I am of age where I'm allowed to enter your property. Those are the kind of things that we can use this for. We've even gone live in companies where we do contactless deliveries, because you don't want to touch people's paper clipboards anymore. But if I'm delivering Schedule 6 drugs to you, you need to make sure that you're giving it to the right recipient. If I'm delivering a phone, an expensive phone, you don't want to give it to the wrong person. So we've gone live with a company like Skynet, where they do contactless delivery, and it's verified against the Department of Home Affairs. We are able to pay with face. PIN codes can be stolen. So if you take out a contract with JD Group and you've got revolving credit, you don't have to enter your PIN anymore. You take a selfie and that concludes the payment. The use cases have gone from account creation to consent management to compliance and regulation. The use cases are limitless, really.
Great, and the people love what you are saying, which is very inspiring once again. And I want to move over to Mark Brits. And as Talian mentioned, the use cases for digital identity, a lot of the times we think about it and it's like, you know what, we need this old, I hate the word, but anyway, we need this idea of know your customer to be able to access a service. But that is a very short-sighted use case of identity. Identity is so much more diverse than having a KYC credential or KYC capability to open a bank account. Identity is actually something that we use daily in multiple interactions. In fact, we are now using our identity on this call. I'm presenting myself, I'm Lohan, and I'm here as a moderator, and so are the panelists. So Mark, why... I'm going to ask you two questions back to back. So first of all, why are the banks becoming involved in this concept of identity? And then secondly, where are we in South Africa in terms of the digital identity journey?
So thanks, Lohan. I mean, around the world, banks can fulfill a number of roles, from what is called a relying party, which is a passive activity. And if you looked at a country like Estonia, the customers are being onboarded by a government ID, which provides the bank with the benefit of cost saving. There's another role that a bank can play in terms of an attribute service provider. And in Canada, a product called Verify Me allows third parties to get in touch with the bank and confirm the data that is held by the bank. So, for example, if you wanted to rent an apartment or something like that. And they could even go as far as becoming a system operator, where in, I think, Norway, there's a potential to generate revenues around the actual product of digital identity. So there's a variety of roles that the banks can play. But the banking industry, despite all the popular narratives that you read about, have a high trust factor. All your financial information is held by the banks, and the banks don't sell that data, and they're highly regulated, which is allowing us to have that high degree of trust with the consumer. And then the second element for banks to consider is friction cost, because the onboarding and KYC is a very expensive process. And then to Deline's point, fraud is a billion rand industry that's often perpetrated by people who supposedly owe a duty of care to the organizations that they work for. So there's a real interest in banking to ensure that there is a successful implementation of digital identity, particularly in South Africa. To the second point, and there are a couple of documents, I think, in the handouts that you can read through. In terms of what's happening in South Africa, I mean, South Africa is privileged. They do have a national identity that dates back to the 1950s. And since 1994, all South Africans have been able to get access to 1994, yes. And the Department of Home Affairs has been on a route march to try and improve their offering. So they've moved from an ID book to a smart ID card. Now, several years ago, the South African Financial Blockchain Consortium focused on two concepts that are now taking a little bit of airtime. The one is digital identity, and we'll talk to that, and the other being central bank digital currencies. So with around 60 companies participating, which includes regulators, government departments, BankServe, which is a sister company to the Banking Association, has played a leading role in recording the digital identity narrative in South Africa and is now shaping use cases for three elements: eKYC for financial onboarding, RICA, which is the equivalent for mobile phone operators, and vaccine certificates for future use to improve the utility of the existing experience. And this document is in the handouts for you to read further. There are many other use cases that will develop organically. These are just a few, and we found these the most useful in order to get going and to be able to do something practical. And in South Africa, from April next month, BankServe will begin to collectively build the governance framework and the trust model for the digital identity ecosystem. It'll create a digital identity body that will eventually register prospective digital identity participants, with government playing an active role in its creation. So we have an ambitious target date of July 2023 to finalize and launch digital identity. And although SSI is a targeted outcome and appropriate for this ecosystem, the entire ecosystem will ensure that both centralized and decentralized are accommodated within digital identity. So that's where we are at the moment. Very exciting. Looking forward to the next 6 months as we, as BankServe Africa, in collaboration with all the participants, begin building out that governance framework and the trust model so that we can really get to start testing something in the real world of digital identity.
Great. So clearly there is broader adoption and projects under the radar, and it's something that from a South African perspective, we really kind of want to embrace this concept of digital identity and get it rolled out in the country, which is a very big move. And without government support, there is a question in the chat as well. What is the perceived level of engagement from a South African government? I'll park that one, but clearly from Mark's response, there are quite a lot of support and discussion with government inside the BankServe project, and we are consistently kind of engaging with them to say, hey, you know what, we are going to do this thing. What might this mean for Africa? What might this mean for South Africa? And clearly, we will need government support to actually roll this out successfully. Okay, moving on to I'm going to change my slide. But moving into the world of self-sovereign identity, you know, this is a very specific term. It comes with a very specific set of technologies, governance associated with it. And as the R&D head of Absa Bank, working with this technology now for quite a few years, Sean, can you give us an overview of what is SSI? What is this thing that we call the trust over IP stack? Where does blockchain fit into all of this? Yeah, can you just give us an overview of what it really is, and how does blockchain fit in, and how is this whole technology stack and concept of SSI going to change identity going forward?
Yeah, so just let's call it a 5-minute educational or 5-minute information process related to the concept. Mark touched on a framework, trust framework. If we look at the screen Lohan is presenting, consists of 4 layers. It's trust over IP, governance stack, or self-sovereign governance stack. It goes by many names, but typically it consists of the 4 layers. The bottom layer being your blockchain DLT components. So from a South African perspective, with the program that Mark was referring to, that we are doing with BankServe/BWC components, that would consist of Hyperledger Indy, Hyperledger Aries, and Hyperledger Ursa. I hope I'm pronouncing that correct, URSA. That is the DLT component utilized within the solution that we are looking at. That would typically sit at layer 1. You would have layer 2, where the peer-to-peer communication takes place, and this talks to one of the comments that were asked related to who's going to be monitoring us. So it is going to be it creates a peer-to-peer connection. So only you who are sharing the data and the party who you're sharing the data with will know about the conversation. So that's where the privacy component comes in. If we move up the stack, remember the layer 2 does have a communication with layer 1, but as soon as the trust is established, they will talk directly to each other. We get layer 3. Layer 3 talks to, let's call it, how the information is shared. So your issuer would be a trusted issuer, as we refer to as the golden source. In the case of your identity, it would be the Department of Home Affairs. In case of proof of bank account, that would be the bank that has issued you with the bank account. So if we take ABSA, it would be an ABSA bank account. ABSA would be the golden source. You wouldn't go to, for example, to Standard Bank and ask them for proof of bank account, that I have a proof of bank account with ABSA. Your middle holder, that of course is your wallet, and typically that would be a mobile app that would be in the center. And then you would have the verifier. The verifier is with whom you are sharing the data. That you, as part of the process, actually give consent to that actual sharing of the data. Typically, it would be, Dalian and them touched on it, if I am, for example, having to, I'm opening a bank account, for example, and in this case, Bank A is the verifier. They want to know my ID, they want to know my date of birth, and not necessarily my gender. You would then share with the bank your ID, date of birth, but not the gender. Where in today's terms, when you give across your ID card, they make a photocopy of it. They've got all of that data. Where within this space, you only share the relevant information across a trusted link. And then, of course, the top layer, which is your different sectors within the ecosystem. For example, health, supply chain, and for example, finance. You would have your M&O environment or your telco environment involved as let's call it, application from an ecosystem perspective. If you are sharing identity with a bank versus sharing identity with an M&O versus sharing identity because I'm being admitted to a hospital, it's all the same identity. It's not a different component of something. It's all, at the end of the day, the same identity. That is very quickly the overview of the trust stack. So back to you, Lohan.
Great, thank you for that very short introduction to SSI. I know it's a very complicated topic, and it's not easy to explain it in a short amount of time. So Anushka, I would like to ask you a question, and then I would like to go and kind of pose some questions. But Anushka, from your perspective, what do you see are the different use cases in terms of self-sovereign identity in your line of work? What projects do you know are currently happening? And then the last question, and I actually want Anushka to give her answer, but then I'm going to ask the same question to all of you anyway, is how do we make this technology available for everyone? It's one thing to say, hey, you know what, you need to have a smartphone and you need to have data, but the reality is, like Terry mentioned, there are billions of people that don't have that capability. So if you can give a bit of a background on use cases, what's happening in your part of in your line of work, and then how do we actually solve it for the people that don't have the current technology that we assume they should have to interact with the digital identity world?
Okay, thanks, Lohan. So, as you know, I'm product manager for ecosystem at IOHK for the Tala Prism product, which is our identity product. And we currently have three big projects that are on the way. still starting off in their early stages, but the POCs have already kicked off and there are already users that are onboarded. So we've got the Ministry of Education in Ethiopia that's looking, we realize that we need a digital ID to be able to issue learners with their grades, their education credentials, so that those education credentials can actually be used to apply to universities or apply for jobs. And what's really amazing about this particular use case is that California government has just, kicked off a project now saying they would work on a trust framework or a governance framework similar to the Pan-Canadian Trust framework. And their first use case is also going to be in education. So there's already this opportunity to collaborate between these two countries on different continents when it comes to this particular use case. At this point in time, there's about 8,000 students that are already registered during the proof of concept and during the first phase of delivery. And that should grow to about 1 million by the end of the year. And then there's also the other side of the coin where teachers are or teaching instructors are also being given teaching performance credentials in this project. So that's in education. Then we've got World Mobile, which is a telecoms company that's really wanting to connect the unconnected, and they've got a really innovative technology that they're testing out that will bring down the cost of using data and so on. And this pilot currently has about 3,000 users. And the third project I will mention here is Pezesha in Kenya. And this project is looking at banking the unbanked. So as you can see across these three industry verticals, identity is the foundation that needs to be put in place so that all these other things can actually be built on top of it. So we're really looking at strong projects, and we're hoping that they would be successful and fly. Hopefully by the end of this year, we'll have good examples to give. Your second question, I think the other panelists spoke about other projects in South Africa and abroad as well. So there's a lot of use cases, but I'd like to plant the seed of the convenience economy in people's heads today, because I was having a coffee chat with a colleague and we came up with this concept of the convenience economy. Because imagine being able to um, perform transactions with all these different organizations in the world and in our country and in your life by at the click of a button, instead of having to fill out umpteen forms every other day. So yeah, let's see how we can make this convenience economy come through while also building up banking the unbanked and focusing on giving people digital identities. In terms of how people without devices and without data can actually participate, Lohan, I think this is where I find the blockchain community to be like absolutely phenomenal and focusing on community and solving community problems. And this is where I see real innovation taking place, where people are saying, okay, data is costing a lot. So, what is the data solution that we can come up with? What are the device solutions that we can come up with? And, I've heard of POCs where instead of using a device, perhaps using a QR code that's printed on a card, or perhaps using a different type of card device instead of a um, cell phone. So, I think that we will see a lot in this space, but I'll let some of the other panelists speak about what else they are seeing. Thanks.
So yeah, we are basically out of time, but I want to give all the panelists a very quick kind of closing remarks, and I'm kind of going to collapse a lot of the questions in the Q&A into one. But first of all, like just in a few seconds, what do we need to do to make this successful on a country level, and then how are we going to solve the concept of interoperability so everybody can understand and utilize this technology at scale? And you can kind of go around, Robin. I'm not going to put anyone on the spot. You can just kind of unmute and then give your kind of closing remarks, please.
Lohan, I'd like to go first, if I may. I acknowledge this convenient economy. It's very much part of where the digital data bank is going. But to make it successful, we have to give the every citizen a mechanism to very easily be able to interact and transact over the internet. And It's just a matter of mitigating that risk of identity. All the other factors are already in there, and that will just create the interoperability. You know, when banks talk to banks, that they don't question one another because they know who they are. And it should be exactly the same with an individual. Once an individual's been authenticated, they shouldn't have to worry about interacting and transacting any further, or identifying themselves. And once we've got that, we've then got true interoperability across all ecosystems.
So can you, the one thing, and I agree with what Terry and Anushka is saying, from a business perspective though, in terms of creating interoperability, this is where the digital ecosystem or the digital community in South Africa, there is a digital identity community that's currently working really hard with a number of industry players around the table to say, how do we make sure that we hold each other accountable, that we have certain standards that we meet, that we create a layer of interoperability, but we also speak the same language so that we don't create mass confusion. Similarly, when it comes to individuals, basically what we're doing is we're recreating trust. Trust has been broken down on a multitude of ways. Just think about the Tinder swindler and how something like this could solve a problem on a dating website. But we as consumers need to keep companies accountable and to say, when you're dealing with me, make sure that it's me. If we start driving that requirement in our hyper-consumer environment, consumers are becoming more aware of their rights when it comes to their data. And honestly, the only person that has the right to use your data is you, and you were given it by birthright. Nobody else has the right to use it. We need to stand on that and make companies accountable. But we need to bring the company and the consumer closer together through technology so that we can fight against fraud and create convenience for customers, both business as well as consumer.
So, Lohan, if I can jump in there, I mean, digital identity is a foundational concept, and it's going to create opportunities for much more to be done than what we're talking about today. We haven't even thought of some of the solutions that will come out of digital identity. And when we can get to the point where I can say that I am who I am because I say I am, that's when we are going to be able to actually enjoy the benefits of digital identity. And we've got to get to that point. So thank you very much for having me.
Good. Anushka, do you have anything, last comments?
Well, I would just say that if anyone has the opportunity to participate in pilots or POCs or projects related to self-sovereign identity and digital identity, please, step up, participate so that we can really accelerate what's happening here. Thanks, Lohan.
Great. Thank you very much, everyone. Unfortunately, we didn't get to all the questions, but thank you to all the panelists. It's been a very interesting discussion, and really looking forward to making this a reality. It's been a very long journey, and I think we are making small steps towards a big goal. And when we get to the point where this becomes pervasive and everyone is able to use it, even if it's low-tech, high-tech, smartphones, no smartphones, I think we would have the ability not only to enable an enormous amount of potential, but also unlock a lot of value and reduce a significant amount of fraud. So thank you very much. And yeah.
Thank you.
Pleasure. Thanks, Lohan. Thanks, everybody. Bye-bye.